Malik Dyer gripped the steering wheel as the headlights in his mirror grew closer. The engine's roar drowning out the echo of distant festival music. Behind him, the black SUV hunted through the narrow streets of Toxteth, its driver relentless, its purpose deadly. What had started as a night of celebration was now a desperate race for survival. A chase born from secrets, betrayal, and one missing memory card that would expose the truth buried deep within the city's heart. The night began with laughter, color, and rhythm. Toxteth was alive, transformed into a scene of joy as the annual community festival reached its final hours. Lanterns glowed in warm shades of orange and gold, strung between lampposts. Music pulsed from speakers, drifting over the rows of terraced houses. Children darted between food stalls, clutching candy floss and paper cups of lemonade, while the older residents chatted over grilled food, happy to see their neighborhood brimming with life. It was a night that promised only peace and celebration, the kind that brought everyone together after months of planning and excitement. As the clock crept toward midnight, the crowds began to thin. The air had cooled, and the smell of rain lingered. Stallholders packed up, folding tables and sweeping away paper plates. Street cleaners started their rounds, moving slowly through the narrow roads, their yellow lights flashing softly in the dark. The music grew faint, replaced by the low hum of departing cars, and the occasional burst of laughter from people heading home. It was the calm after a long, bright day, the kind of silence that makes you think the night is finally done. But in Toxteth, that silence was about to be broken. Near Prince's Park, a silver hatchback moved slowly through the empty streets, its headlights turned off. The driver, a young man in a black jacket, kept one hand tight on the steering wheel and the other resting nervously on the gear stick. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The streets were quiet, but his heart raced with the uneasy rhythm of someone who knew he was being followed. A faint hum grew behind him, another engine, distant but gaining ground. He pressed his foot harder on the accelerator, trying to stay calm. Moments later, a black SUV turned onto the same street, its headlights piercing the darkness like twin blades of light. The sound of its tires skidding over the damp road shattered the calm. The silver car shot forward, its tires screeching as it rounded a corner, barely missing a row of parked vehicles. The SUV followed close behind, engine roaring, the chase now in full motion through the tight residential lanes. Windows rattled as the two vehicles tore through the night, one fleeing, one hunting. The few people still outside froze where they stood. A man walking his dog pulled it close, stepping behind a gate as the cars raced past. A woman carrying leftover food from the festival stopped in her tracks, clutching her chest as the sound of engines faded into the distance. What they had witnessed lasted only seconds, but it carried a violence that hung in the air long after the cars were gone. Inside the silver hatchback, the driver's breathing quickened. He glanced again into the mirror. The SUV was still there, closing the distance. The streets were too narrow, too familiar. He knew he couldn't outrun it for long. He turned down another road, hoping to lose them near the park. His mind raced through escape plans that all felt useless. Behind him, the black SUV swerved sharply, matching every turn with ruthless precision. Farther away, the last traces of the festival were disappearing. The music had stopped completely, and only the faint flicker of streetlights lit the wet pavement. A few residents, still awake, noticed the sound of engines echoing strangely in the distance. It didn't sound like ordinary traffic. It was faster, erratic. A dangerous rhythm that didn't belong to a quiet night. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise vanished. The streets fell silent again, but the air carried a tension that was hard to explain. Dogs barked from behind fences. A few neighbors peered through curtains, unsure of what they'd heard. Somewhere in the distance, a single car door slammed, then nothing. The night that had started with laughter and music now held its breath. Toxteth, unaware of what was about to happen, slept beneath the calm surface of its ordinary streets. But beneath that calm, fear was already moving, quiet and unseen, waiting to show its face before the dawn. At 12:47 a.m., the silence of Toxteth was ripped apart by a single, sharp crack. It was so sudden that many thought it was the sound of fireworks left over from the festival. But then came another shot, and another, each one echoing louder than the last, bouncing off the rows of brick houses that lined the narrow streets. Within seconds, the quiet night was filled with chaos. A silver car sped past the corner of Selborne Street, its tires screeching as it fought for control on the wet road. Behind it, the black SUV roared forward, headlights flashing wildly like a predator closing in on its prey. A bullet tore through the rear window of the silver hatchback, sending glass exploding across the pavement. The car swerved dangerously close to the curb, barely avoiding a parked vehicle before veering sharply back into the road. Inside, the driver's hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, adrenaline surging. He ducked instinctively as another shot rang out, the bullet slamming into the metal frame of the car with a deafening clang. The chase was no longer about speed, it was survival. Residents jolted awake, startled by the bursts of sound outside their homes. Curtains flew open, lights flicked on, and confused faces appeared at upstairs windows. Some thought it was a fight, others a crash. But the truth became clear when the unmistakable echo of more gunfire filled the air. 7 shots in total, quick, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. In one house, a young family awoke to find a bullet hole in their living room wall. The slug lodged deep into the plaster just feet from where they had been sleeping. The mother stared at it in disbelief, frozen by the realization of how close death had come. As the last shot faded, the silver car suddenly jerked sideways, slamming into a parked van with a hollow metallic thud. The impact was violent enough to send the van rolling slightly forward, its alarm blaring into the night. Steam hissed from the crushed bonnet of the silver hatchback. The black SUV slowed for a moment, its brake lights flaring red, before speeding away into the darkness, disappearing down the next street without a trace. For a moment, everything went still again. The sound of the van's alarm echoed through the block, joined by the distant barking of dogs and the faint hum of sirens growing nearer. Neighbors began stepping outside, cautious and wide-eyed. Some filmed with their phones, others simply stared, trying to understand what had just torn through their quiet corner of the city. A few brave souls approached the crashed car, calling out to see if anyone was inside. The driver's door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. The seat was empty, only shattered glass, a smear of blood on the steering wheel, and a trail of red droplets leading toward the alley, told the story of what had happened. When police arrived minutes later, the scene looked like something out of a nightmare. Blue lights washed over the street, illuminating the broken glass scattered across the road, and the bullet holes punched into nearby walls. Officers quickly cordoned off the area, shouting for residents to return indoors. Forensics teams arrived soon after, moving with quiet urgency as they marked each shell casing found near the crash site. The first task was to trace where the shots had come from. Investigators found that the bullets had been fired from behind, most likely from the black SUV during the chase. Each one had been aimed low and close, suggesting the shooter knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't random, it wasn't reckless, it was targeted. The driver of the silver hatchback, whoever he was, had vanished into the dark, leaving behind only questions. There was blood on the steering wheel, but no sign of a body. Officers searched nearby alleys and gardens, shining torches through every shadow, but the man had simply disappeared. The only clue was a set of muddy footprints leading toward the park before fading into the grass. By dawn, Toxteth was awake. News of the gunfire spread fast, carried through social media, and whispered across garden fences. People stood outside their homes in dressing gowns, pointing at bullet holes and broken glass. For years, the neighborhood had worked hard to rebuild its sense of peace and safety. That night shattered it in seconds. The festival that had brought the community together just hours earlier was now a distant memory. What replaced it was fear. Fear of what the chase meant, who had been targeted, and whether the gunfire would return. No one yet knew why the cars had been racing through their streets, but everyone understood one thing: Toxteth had changed forever in the space of 7 gunshots. By morning the police cordon stretched across several blocks of Toxteth, sealing off the scene that had erupted in chaos only hours before. Blue tape fluttered gently in the breeze, and officers moved methodically between the crash site and the nearby alleyways. The silver hatchback sat where it had collided with the van, its windshield shattered. The front crumpled. Evidence markers dotted the street like scattered confetti, each one representing a fragment of the night's violence. Residents watched from their windows as detectives photographed the scene, taking notes and gathering shell casings from the ground. The neighborhood that had been filled with festival music hours earlier now buzzed with the low murmur of police radios and uneasy whispers. Inside the car, investigators found blood on the steering wheel, the driver's seat, and the edge of the door. It wasn't much, but enough to suggest the driver had been injured before vanishing. The glove compartment hung open, empty. The car's interior smelled faintly of gunpowder and burnt rubber. When the plates were checked, it turned out the vehicle wasn't registered to anyone in Toxteth. It had been rented 2 days earlier from a company outside the city center, using a temporary driving license and a prepaid debit card. Whispers about gangs, debts, and unfinished business. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered that Malik had been at the community festival just hours before the chase. Several whistlers recalled seeing him near the food stalls close to the park. More importantly, a few mentioned an argument. He had been seen with 2 men, both tall, wearing dark hoodies, and speaking in harsh tones. The exchange had been tense enough to draw attention, though no one could hear what was said over the noise of the music. After that moment, Malik disappeared from the festival crowd, and by midnight he was behind the wheel of a rented car with someone chasing him through the streets. Still, one question hung unanswered: where was Malik now? The blood in the car proved he had been wounded, but there was no sign of a body, no trace of him at any hospital, and no activity on his bank accounts. The trail ended where the chase had begun. As officers reviewed the evidence again and again, a chilling possibility emerged. Maybe Malik hadn't run from his attackers at all. Maybe he had been running towards something hidden in Toxteth's dark corners, waiting to be found. The investigation had slowed to a crawl. Weeks after the gunfire tore through Toxteth, detectives found themselves circling the same questions with no clear answers. The silver hatchback had yielded all it could, and the search for Malik Dyer had gone cold. But a small discovery was about to breathe new life into the case. A discovery that started not with a police lead, but with a photographer who had been working at the festival earlier that night. The photographer, a local man named Chris, had spent the entire day capturing images of families, performers, and market stalls. When the news of the chase broke, he went through his files, wondering if he might have caught something unusual in the background. He didn't realize until later that his camera held something crucial: an image taken near the food stalls that showed Malik mid-argument with 2 men. The picture wasn't clear enough to show faces in detail, but one of the men was wearing a black hoodie with a distinctive white logo on the sleeve, a marking known to police from prior intelligence. When Chris turned the photo over to investigators, it gave them their first real connection between Malik and the suspected criminals. Detectives began piecing together what might have happened. The 2 men in the photo were identified as brothers from a nearby district, both known for their ties to an underground betting network. The operation had long been whispered about, but never proven. Illegal betting, match-fixing, and money laundering were all suspected, but police had never found hard evidence. That changed when the photo showed Malik holding something small and rectangular in his right hand, a memory card. The theory grew quickly. Malik may have somehow obtained a piece of evidence linking the brothers to their illegal activities. Whether he had stolen it or been given it by someone else was unclear, but it became obvious that the card held something valuable enough to risk lives over. Detectives believed the men had confronted him at the festival, demanding it back. When he refused, the confrontation escalated, and by midnight the chase began. Days later, A forensics team returned to the crash site for another search, focusing on the interior of the car. This time, under the driver's seat, they found a cracked plastic case, the kind used to hold a camera memory card. It was empty. The discovery sent a ripple of excitement through the investigation room. Malik had clearly been carrying the card that night, but if the case was empty, it meant he had hidden or passed off the real one before the shooting. Detectives revisited every possible location. Malik might have gone before the chase. CCTV footage from the area around the park showed him stopping briefly near a food stand, just minutes before the silver hatchback appeared. He was seen placing something small on the counter before walking away. The stall had since been dismantled after the festival, and no one had noticed anything left behind. Still, the image hinted that Malik might have hidden the card somewhere in the festival grounds before fleeing. The pieces began to fit together, though the full picture was still dark and uncertain. Malik had something that powerful people wanted gone. The black SUV, the chase, and the gunfire were all parts of a desperate attempt to retrieve that evidence. The brothers were questioned, but denied any involvement, claiming they had been nowhere near Toxteth that night. With no physical proof to tie them to the crime, police had no choice but to release them. But inside the station, no one believed their denial. For weeks, the investigation dragged on with little progress. The public's interest began to fade, and the story dropped from headlines. Yet among the detectives still assigned to the case, there was an unshakable feeling that Malik's disappearance was not the end of the story. Somewhere, that missing memory card was waiting to surface, a small, silent object capable of exposing everything. The team didn't know it yet, but they were about to uncover the one thing that would explain everything. Not just why Malik had been chased, but what he had risked his life to protect. The truth wasn't buried deep. It had been sitting in plain sight, quietly waiting to be found. The search of the storage site began early on a gray morning, weeks after the trail had grown cold. A small team of officers sifted through piles of discarded items from the festival, torn banners, broken lights, and the remnants of food stalls that had been left untouched since that chaotic night. Dust hung in the air as boxes were opened one by one, each filled with the forgotten fragments of a happier evening. For hours, nothing appeared useful. Then one officer, kneeling beside a stack of folded tables, noticed something half buried under a tarpaulin. It was a camera scratched, dented, and streaked with dried mud. The lens was cracked, and the strap had snapped, but inside the casing was something that made every heart in the room jolt. A memory card still intact. When the card was examined at the station, it revealed far more than anyone expected. The files held not just festival photographs, but a series of videos recorded secretly before the event. The footage began innocently, scenes of the setup, vendors preparing, people laughing, but then buried among the ordinary clips was a recording taken behind the main stage. It showed a dimly lit meeting between the two brothers, and a man whose face was immediately recognizable. He wasn't a criminal or gang member. He was a respected local businessman, known for funding community projects and speaking at council meetings about improving Toxteth's reputation. In the footage, the businessman handed the brothers a thick envelope. They counted the money, nodded, and shook hands. The audio was faint, but a few words could be made out. Talk of betting, payments, and ensuring a fixed result. It was the proof investigators had been missing, and Malik had been right in the center of it. Somewhere along the line, he must have stumbled onto this evidence, realizing its power. He had either recorded it himself or obtained the footage from someone else. That was why he became a target. He hadn't been caught in random violence. He had been silenced before he could expose the truth. The discovery of the footage sent shockwaves through the city. The businessman, once seen as a community leader, arrested within days. The brothers were taken back into custody, their confident denials replaced with silence. Police held a press conference, confirming the footage's authenticity and announcing a new investigation into the illegal betting ring that had thrived unnoticed beneath the surface of Toxteth's festivals and local sports events. But even with the arrests, One mystery refused to rest. Malik Dyer was still missing. Searches were renewed, with officers combing through the park and surrounding streets, hoping to find any trace of him. Forensic teams revisited the crash site once again, but there was still no sign of where he went after leaving the car. The trail of blood that had once seemed so promising ended abruptly on the grass, as though he had vanished into thin air. Some believed he had died from his injuries that night and was hidden by those who chased him. Others thought he escaped, disappearing deliberately to protect himself once he knew the car was safe. Among the residents, stories began to grow. Whispered tales of someone matching his description seen boarding a late-night bus, or a man limping through the docks on the night of the shooting. None were ever confirmed, but they kept the mystery alive, blending truth and speculation into a legend that lingered over Toxteth. Months later, the area slowly began to recover. Bullet holes were patched, and life resumed its steady rhythm. The next year's festival was smaller, quieter, and held under the shadow of what had happened. People celebrated, but there was a caution in the air, a sense that joy could turn to fear in a heartbeat. When the lights went out at midnight, the silence felt heavier than before, as if the streets themselves remembered the echo of gunfire. The footage from the memory card was eventually released in a documentary that reignited public interest in the case. The closing credits carried Malik's name with the words, "Still missing." Toxteth never forgot him, the man who ran through the night not for survival alone, but to protect the truth. Even years later, when people walked past Selborne Street, they could still point to the wall where the bullet had lodged and speak in hushed tones about the night the music stopped. The chase, the gunfire, and the missing man became part of the area's story, a haunting reminder that beneath even the brightest festivals, shadows can still hide, waiting for the